My name is Karen, and I am a 38-year-old office worker. I have been married to Paul for 3 years, who I met through a family friend. My family is somewhat wealthy, and since my sister Janet and I are the only children, our relatives were concerned about who would inherit our family's assets. This is why they introduced me to Paul. Paul moved in with us at my family home shortly after we met. My mom had passed away a few years before, so it was just my dad, my husband, and me living together. Paul was very nice and took good care of my father. However, the family friend who introduced us warned me just before our wedding that Paul was very interested in money. This worried me, but Paul didn't show any signs of greed, so we got married. Even so, I kept an eye on him because of what the family friend said. Paul didn't seem greedy, but he was curious about my father's wealth. He often asked about it casually when he and my father were drinking together, but since my father spoke openly about it, I wasn't too concerned. Paul also took an interest in my sister Janet, who is 6 years younger than me and very lively and outgoing, unlike my calm nature. Janet has flashy relationships with men and looks quite different from me, which surprised Paul when he first saw her. Watching Paul be fascinated by Janet, who was so different from me, made me feel uneasy. One day, when Paul found out I couldn't inherit my father's estate, he yelled at me, "You can't inherit the property. I have no use for you anymore. We're getting divorced right now." Later, after he remarried, I got my revenge on him and my sister. At first, I believed that having a beautiful sister meant there was nothing to worry about, but I eventually realized the reasons behind our relatives' concerns. My father doted on my sister, providing her with every opportunity, including the chance to attend both college and community college after graduating. However, my sister lacked a clear purpose for her education. She seemed mainly interested in avoiding work. Our mother tried to encourage her to get a job immediately after her first college graduation, but my father supported her decision to continue her education at community college. After completing her studies there, she secured a position at a company owned by one of my father's acquaintances. This job, however, lasted only 6 months. She resigned with the unexpected excuse that she couldn't showcase her talents at that workplace. Both my mother and I were taken aback. My sister spoke as if she fully understood the job, despite her minimal experience. My father, ever her supporter, quickly found her another job. It wasn't long after she started this new role that my mother fell ill and was hospitalized. During this time, my sister visited her daily, frequently taking time off from her new job. She eventually resigned from this position too, claiming she needed to care for our mother. But her idea of care involved mostly chatting with our mother or being engrossed in her mobile phone in the waiting room. I found myself handling practical tasks, such as changing my mother's hospital laundry, while my sister offered little real assistance. It may have been comforting for my mother to have company, but her condition deteriorated about a month after she was hospitalized. She soon reached a point where she could no longer speak. Within 3 weeks of her condition worsening, my mother passed away. The suddenness of her passing left both my father and sister too shaken to even prepare for the funeral. This left a significant burden on me during an already difficult time. After my mother passed away, I found myself handling all the arrangements. Fortunately, our relatives helped, and we were able to bid farewell to her peacefully. In the wake of this, my sister took on a part-time job and moved into her own place. However, her earnings from the job weren't sufficient to cover her rent and other living expenses. Consequently, our father stepped in, covering her rent and utility bills, while the money she made was mostly spent on her leisure activities. Whenever her part-time income proved inadequate, she would turn to our father for additional financial support. Under our mother's watch, such requests were kept in check, as she was strict about financial discipline with my sister. However, after her death, my father began to indulge these requests, providing whatever money my sister asked for without hesitation. Initially, I saw no issue with this setup, assuming both my father and sister were content. Even after marrying and living with my husband in my parents' home, this financial arrangement continued. Unknown to me at the time, my sister also began asking my husband for money, and he complied, often asking her to keep it a secret to avoid causing me any jealousy. He found it difficult to say no to my attractive sister and willingly contributed to her expenses. My sister essentially lived off the money she received from both my father and my husband, engaging with her part-time job only sporadically according to her whims. This unsustainable lifestyle came to an abrupt end when our father became ill and required hospitalization. I stepped in to care for him, balancing hospital visits with my work responsibilities. Despite the severity of our father's condition, my sister never appeared at the hospital. Instead, she began calling me, aggressively demanding money. She argued that since she had been receiving a regular allowance from our father, I should continue providing for her as before, stating that her rent and utilities were still being deducted from our father's account. Her tone was confrontational, and I was stunned by these revelations. I became infuriated by her selfish attitude, focused solely on maintaining her own lifestyle while completely disregarding our father's well-being in the hospital. The situation exposed a painful truth about my sister's priorities and strained our relationship even further. I was tempted to hang up on her, but she sounded like she was in trouble. So I asked her, "How much money has Dad been giving you every month?" and suggested, "Get a full-time job and support yourself with what you earn." My sister responded irritably, "Stop nagging. I was getting $1,000 a month, and remember, rent is separate." I was shocked by her response. She seemed proud of the amount, and it made me think that if I continued to give her this much money each month, she would never be motivated to work seriously. At first, I didn't see a problem with giving her money, thinking my father would soon recover from his hospitalization. But then his condition took a turn for the worse, and I quickly reached out to our relatives. The doctor confirmed it was serious, which shocked me. During this stressful time, I needed my husband's support, but he rarely visited the hospital, claiming he was busy with work. When he did visit, he asked inappropriate questions like, "Frank's estate must be huge, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, are you going to split it in half?" I was speechless. My husband seemed only interested in the inheritance, and I felt a mix of realization and disgust, understanding what the relatives meant when they said he was obsessed with money. When I called my sister to inform her of our father's critical condition, her only concern was about her finances. "Make sure you pay me every month. I can't live without that money," she demanded. The call ended suddenly, leaving me furious at her words. But I was also worried because I thought I heard a faint male voice in the background. I felt uneasy when I heard a familiar voice on the other end of the phone. About a month later, my father passed away. Sadly, neither my sister nor my husband was with him in his last moments. From my experience with my mother's funeral, I knew how tough it was to organize one. Neither my husband nor my sister offered any help, and my sister didn't even come to the funeral. My husband did show up, but left quickly, claiming he had work. A relative who had introduced us asked me, "Where's Paul? It's odd for the husband not to be here, isn't it?" I just gave a forced smile and said he was busy with work and had gone home. The relative seemed disappointed, and I felt like sighing too. After my father's funeral, when I finally had a moment to myself, my husband asked me with a sly smile, "So how much did you inherit? Even if you split it, you must have gotten a lot, right?" Just like the relatives had warned before our marriage, he was only interested in my father's inheritance. I told him, looking straight at him, my sister got $100 million, and I got nothing. I hadn't even spoken to the lawyer yet, and was still dealing with the funeral. Seeing my husband so excited about the inheritance almost made me laugh rather than angry. Believing what I said, he immediately shouted, "What? You can't inherit any property. I don't need you anymore. Let's get divorced now." I felt the same way. So I snapped back, "Let's do it. You married me for my father's inheritance anyway." I handed him the divorce papers I had prepared. He seemed surprised, as if he hadn't expected this, but he signed them anyway. As he left the house after signing the divorce papers, he said bitterly, "I'll divorce you, who gets 0, and remarry your sister Janet, who gets the $100 million, and then he left. I didn't care what he said and went ahead with the divorce, happy to be rid of my awful husband. It seemed like he started trying to marry my sister the very next day. A few days later, he called me, demanding, "Do you still believe that story? When will you sort out the inheritance? Hurry up and give Janet the $100 million dollars." He shouted this over the phone. I had been waiting for him to contact me because I didn't want to reach out first after he left. I answered him calmly, "Let's discuss this at my place next Sunday. I'm preparing for the procedure and will be waiting." Thinking he was about to receive the inheritance, my ex-husband happily ended the call. However, I was actually looking forward to seeing his reaction when he discovered the truth. On the weekend, my ex-husband and my sister came to my family home and were surprised to see a lawyer there. My ex tried to act normal, thinking, "Of course you need a lawyer when inheriting a lot of money." Then the lawyer looked puzzled at my ex-husband and began compensation claim. Before we talk about any inheritance, we need to address Karen's compensation claim against Paul. The lawyer then showed my ex-husband several photos of him leaving my sister's house, clearly dated before our divorce was finalized. "These are evidence of infidelity," the lawyer told him, "so you owe compensation." I had overheard him discussing the inheritance with my sister and had asked the lawyer to look into his infidelity. They might have thought I was too distracted by my father's funeral, but my ex-husband and sister were meeting at her place almost daily, giving me plenty of evidence. The topic quickly shifted from inheritance to compensation, leaving my ex-husband and sister shocked. However, my ex-husband recovered quickly and scoffed. "Compensation is nothing compared to the $100 million from the inheritance. I'll pay it right away." He then signed the compensation documents provided by the lawyer, trying to appear unconcerned and confident. I confirmed everything and told him, "Enjoy your life with my sister, who inherited nothing. Since you signed, I'll make sure you pay the compensation." When they heard there was no inheritance, my sister screamed in shock, and her husband turned bright red, angrily saying, "There's no way the inheritance is 0. I won't let you take it all for yourself." The lawyer then calmly began to explain to the furious couple, "Janet is technically the stepdaughter of your late mother and was not legally adopted by your late father. Therefore, there is no legal parent-child relationship, and Janet cannot inherit anything from your father's estate." I'd also explained to my confused sister about our family history. "When our parents remarried, Janet, you were about a year old, so you probably don't remember. But I do. I was 8 years old when our parents remarried, and I was happy to suddenly have a sister. I never imagined that sister would end up taking my husband. Our parents had each had children from previous relationships, and someone thought it best for them to remarry. My mother treated me as if I were her own daughter, and my father was very fond of my sister. Maybe because she wasn't his biological daughter, he spoiled her a bit extra, wanting to make sure she felt loved. Although both our parents had children from previous marriages, my mother, who was suspected by some relatives of targeting our wealthy family's assets, refused to legally adopt my sister. The relatives only suggested marriage proposals for me because they knew I was the only one who could legally inherit my father's property. If our parents had had a child together, it might have made things even more complicated, but fortunately or unfortunately, they never did. Now, I understand why my father continued to support my sister financially. Even after she grew up, he couldn't leave her any inheritance. I never legally adopted my mother, so legally, we weren't parent and child, but that never mattered in how we lived every day. It turns out that my parents had never explained to my sister that they were both previously married before they got together. She only learned this truth today. When my ex-husband realized the situation, his face quickly changed from bright red to pale blue. He had not only failed to secure any inheritance from my sister, but had also signed a document obligating him to pay compensation. Looking visibly shocked, my ex-husband asked me, "Was what you said about my sister getting $100 million and me getting nothing a lie?" I struggled to hold back my laughter and replied, "Of course, it was a lie. I said it to get back at you for cheating on me. Plus, there's no such thing as a bankrupt estate worth $100 million. Even my wealthy father didn't have that kind of money." Suddenly, my sister, who had been quiet until then, screamed out, "I've been relying on Dad's inheritance and have been spending a lot. What about the money Dad used to give me? Will Karen cover it now?" I responded to my sister, who seemed panicked, "You have a dependable husband now, so you shouldn't need that money anymore, should you? Let Paul take care of you." She turned to look at her pale-faced husband, who shook his head and said, "I've also done a lot of shopping, expecting to receive the inheritance, so I can't afford it. Plus, I have the compensation to pay, so I'm financially stretched." At that point, my ex-husband began to apologize profusely to me. "Karen, I'm really sorry. It was all my fault. Will you forgive me and consider starting over?" Watching this scene, the lawyer had to stifle his laughter as he prepared to leave. The confidence and arrogance my ex-husband had shown upon arriving had completely evaporated, and his deep apologies now seemed utterly absurd. After we finished our discussion, my ex-husband and my sister left the house looking defeated, and not long after, they divorced. My ex-husband, who had remarried with the intention of gaining an inheritance, suddenly found himself without interest in my sister once the prospect of money was gone. He even muttered to himself that, with the compensation payments he owed me, he couldn't possibly support my sister. With no assets to his name, it was decided that he would pay the compensation in installments from his monthly paycheck. The lawyer recommended this method as the most practical solution under the circumstances. After my father's passing, the consequences of his indulgent support became painfully apparent. My sister, who had grown accustomed to financial support from our father, found herself in an unenviable position. She was compelled to work part-time jobs, which barely paid enough to cover her daily expenses, let alone the mounting debts that loomed over her. Despite her efforts, the financial burden proved too heavy. Eventually, overwhelmed by the accumulating debt, she had no choice but to file for personal bankruptcy. In a desperate move to escape her financial woes, she gave up her condominium, disappearing without leaving a trace. As of now, her whereabouts remain unknown, leaving a void in the family that once depended on each other so deeply. The situation underscored a harsh reality. Our father's well-intentioned but ultimately misguided financial support had shielded my sister from the necessity of developing a work ethic and financial independence. This protection, while provided out of love, had left her ill-prepared for the harsh realities of adult life. As she struggled with part-time work and faced the consequences of accumulated debt, it became clear that she was not equipped to handle financial responsibilities on her own. As for myself, the aftermath of these family troubles and the dissolution of my marriage left me residing alone in the family home, a house that now felt too large and empty, echoing with memories of a happier, more intact family. The solitude, however, provided me with ample time for reflection. It became a period of self-discovery and reassessment of what I truly wanted out of life. During this introspective period, some well-meaning relatives suggested that perhaps the time had come for me to consider entering into a new relationship. They talked about introducing me to potential suitors, hoping that a new partnership might bring me happiness and stability. However, the bitter experience with my ex-husband, who had shown his true colors as someone more interested in financial gain than in genuine companionship, made me wary of repeating past mistakes. His betrayal had been a painful lesson in discernment teaching me the importance of knowing someone's character and intentions thoroughly before making such a profound commitment. Determined to take control of my own destiny, I decided to decline the offers from my relatives to arrange introductions. The thought of being matched with another partner who might view me as merely a means to an end was intolerable. Instead, I resolved to find a partner on my own terms, guided by the lessons learned from my past experiences. This decision was empowering, marking a new chapter in my life where I could prioritize my own values and desires in a relationship. In embracing this newfound independence, I began to explore various avenues for meeting potential partners. Whether through social events, community activities, or even online dating platforms, I was committed to finding someone who shared my values, someone who sought a partner for the right reasons, valuing respect, honesty, and genuine affection above financial considerations. This journey was not just about finding a new partner. It was about reclaiming my autonomy and learning to trust again after betrayal. Each step forward was a reaffirmation of my ability to shape my future, a future where my choices would lead to genuine connections and real love, rather than transactional relationships defined by financial dependency. Thus, as I move forward, the lessons of the past remain with me, a guide to avoiding the pitfalls that had once ensnared my family and me, and a beacon towards a more hopeful and self-determined future.